Hey guys, how's it going? So, the balance adjustment preview was shown off, and we've been pretty excited for the next update because Smilegate promised, right, that they were going to start focusing a lot more on balance and not just releasing tons of stuff that was ruining the meta. The meta's been really stale recently. It's high aggro, cleave, etc., and I think people are kind of frustrated and tired of that right now. So I think we're all hoping that the next balance update would have some stuff. Perhaps too optimistic, maybe not. Overall, I think there's some interesting changes, and I definitely want to talk about all of them in depth about each character's changes, if they're good, bad, if it would influence the meta much, right? So the first one is Silverblade Araminta, then Dark Corvus, two ML5s right here. Then we have a RGB limited unit, DN. Then we have Araminta Ludwig Destina for RGB 5 stars. Then we have a 4-star Moonlight character, Guider Aether. And then we have two 4-star RGB characters, Kali and Armin. Something to note about these characters is all of them are ones that people wanted buffed. The only ones I especially cared about was Dark Corvus and DN, because, I just kind of want to use them. But a lot of these characters are ones that have been just terrible for years even. And I think people really wanted changes for a lot of them. And overall, I think they did a decent job. Some are definitely better than others. I think a couple of them missed a little bit too much. But I think that they chose some decent targets for characters that people have just been constantly asking, like, where's Araminta? Where's Destina, Ludwig, etc., right? Or where's Silverblade Araminta? So let's kind of dive into these changes right here. So first of all, Silverblade Araminta, they moved her S2 onto her S1 so that they could change her S2 to be a combat readiness increase when somebody uses an AoE attack on your team. So if, let's say, Ran or Peyra use their opening attack, then she gets a 20% CR push. This makes her a lot easier to build. She wouldn't have to be like 290 something speed compared to your 300 something Ran so that she would get the next turn. It makes it so she can be slower, built a little better. Ran uses S3, she gets the next turn and cuts in front of their opener. All perfect, right? Makes her just a lot easier to use in that situation. Gives her, I think, 25%, I guess, when you max this. Secondly, they're removing the unhealable, which is a little bit disappointing to me. I kind of liked that, but increasing the chance of burns and decreasing combat readiness of the enemy with the highest combat readiness on their team by 30%. The CR decrease, I guess that just kind of helps you control them slightly more, but usually the fastest unit on their team was one that, the 30% push isn't really that big of a deal overall. But the important thing is just more consistency and a CR push. Overall, it helps her be more consistent and better at what she's supposed to be used for, but I don't think it really helps her usability a crazy amount. Currently, debuffs are very strong, but so are cleansers at the same time. And so she's going to get destroyed by a character like Emil Kawarik or Designer Lilibet, for instance, right? So you definitely have to use her in a control cleave or something like that, I would say, if you really want to get the full use out of her. And I don't think it's going to suddenly make her be seen all over. She's still going to be kind of a niche unit, I feel. Although, I will say it kind of feels like she's a little bit better than ML Flan in some ways, if you're trying to be very aggressive. Perhaps not as much in a bruiser matchup, but I think aggressively, if your opponent isn't able to cleanse, she will just end the fight the moment that she gets her S3 off. But you definitely have to draft a whole team around being able to use her. So secondly, we have Dark Corvus. So the main big thing that they started off with was that instead of healing based on the damage he's doing with his S1, he's now healing based on his max health. We don't know the amount of this, but if it's a decent amount, it could be kind of nice, right? Like, let's say he was healing 10% of his health bar, healing for 3,000 health or something every time he S1s. That's kind of nice, actually. Especially if you could do, like, some sort of counter set Corvus or something, but I don't know. I don't think that's really going to work too well. Then secondly, he extincts when he S3s. It's kind of nice. It makes it so stuff like Maid Chloe or Ruel isn't just going to keep bringing people back. Traditionally, Dark Corvus is a Guild War unit, and so that's mainly where you're going to be using this extinction and the heal, etc. I think in RTA he's probably going to be too hard to use still. And lastly, they increase the damage on his S3 and when you soul burn, so just making it so it's easier to kill characters. Maybe you don't have to soul burn it every time on some of the squishier ones as well. All in all, I don't think this really makes him that much more usable. I actually find this buff to be very disappointing. It changes so little about him, and he just doesn't really get much out of it. He's still just going to stand there like a rock waiting to get hit. It doesn't make him more usable into a lot of his counters, such as characters use injury or, I don't know, Landy, Spectre, Tenebra, any of this kind of just high damage things that pelt his team. He just doesn't really get anything out of it. He's still just Dark Corvus, but slightly better. And I think overall, it really changes nothing with him, I would say. Diane, so some people think that this is way too small of a buff, but I think it's pretty nice. So before, she would try and shield the team and then dispel a debuff. So if you have unbuffable, you would get no shield and then you would lose the unbuffable. So she basically wastes her entire turn. Now she actually dispels 2 debuffs and then puts the barrier. Thank God, it's so much better this way. So this makes it so you could have a high effect resist DN possibly, use her against, like, let's say Angel of Light. You dispel the debuffs, then put the barrier. That's kind of nice. Is this enough though? I'm not really so sure. She's horribly weak until into Rimuru, for instance. She definitely has issues with kind of some of the cleave and aggro sort of teams, you know. She doesn't actually heal the team, she just buffs the team. This definitely makes her a lot better versus a character like Peyra, though, that she can remove the debuffs and shield immediately, so you don't have to worry about drafting her into Angel of Light or Peyra, assuming you have some effect resist. I think it's nice overall. Diane's a character that can go a little bit over the edge, possibly, so I think they were a little worried about that when they wanted to buff her. They didn't want to make her too crazy or do anything insane, because if the meta slows down, then she could be a really strong pick, possibly. And maybe they're just a little bit scared of that. I'm not sure. I kind of wish she got a little something more. But I think that this definitely helps her a lot, because currently she's basically unusable in most situations. Most of the most popular characters in the game just make her completely useless, or Rimuru just steals the buffs, so you're just buffing the enemy team. Araminta. So this is a character people have wanted buffed for a long time now, and I think the changes are very interesting. So, for starters, instead of ignoring effect resist on her S1 and decreasing cooldown of Flame Pillar every time she S1s, she now detonates. When I first saw that, I thought, oh no, that doesn't seem that good. That seems like a nerf. But when I looked at the other changes, I realized it seems like it fits her, and it seems really good. So the main thing is her S2 is a AoE. It now dispels 2 buffs from the other side, makes them unhealable for 2 turns, increases the attack of all allies, you know, buff and everything. And for each unhealable inflicted, gives her 25% combat readiness. They increase the cooldown, but that doesn't really matter because she's not really ever going to use this twice in a match, generally. Even with the 3-turn cooldown, it's a little unlikely. And I think they're also doing that because since you basically can get an extra turn, they want to increase the cooldown to compensate for that, I think. Sure, your opponent can 15%, and maybe they have water units as well, so a lot of the time you're not going to get 100% CR push. But if you do, that's pretty strong. Even 75% if you're playing a very aggressive team could be enough to take that next turn, though. And then on her S3, now she applies 2 burns, twice the amount, is definitely a huge improvement. And she gets a barrier to be able to survive for longer. So the ideal scenario is you would S2, strip all their immunities and maybe other buffs. This works against like FCC immunity, for instance. And then you apply unhealable to everybody, you attack buff your team, and then you immediately get to S3 doing a bunch of damage, 2 burns, and possibly even stunning some of them, and then getting a barrier. Sounds kind of nice, honestly. I think it differentiates her enough from Silverblade Araminta. I think it sounds pretty fun, and I think people are going to enjoy it. I think Araminta has always lived in Silverblade Araminta's shadow for the longest time, and I know a lot of people are a huge fan of this character and have just wanted her changed, and I think this change definitely gives her a lot more hope than before, and she seems fun. I think that people might enjoy using her. I don't think she's gonna really like change the meta or something like that, but I think she seems kind of nice, you know? Kind of like a more aggressive carrot in a way that actually has some team utility even. Ludwig, okay, another one of the old characters that really needed changes. So they kind of just made him a little bit better at what he already did. So now his S2 has a 100% chance to stun, but before that it decreases buff duration, so you can remove their immunity at the beginning of a match. especially if you're using him in cleave or something like that. That can be nice. Although at the same time, his S2 actually hits so hard, usually characters just die. But if you stun them, you also get 50% CR, 50% combat readiness, which is really good. And his soul burn is now ignores effect resist. And he's a mage, he could even hold book. Not that you would always want to, but that's actually really nice. Just adds more consistency, and that's always good, I think. And then the other big thing is his S3. So first of all, no more soul burn on it because it moved to the S2 there. But they just increased the damage to compensate. And now also, when an enemy's defeated, it extends buff duration by 1 turn. So if you S2, you turn invulnerable. So you'll be able to get another turn of invulnerability, assuming you kill something. And now there's 10% more defense pen. So instead of going 20-30, it's 30-30. So it does a little bit more damage, assuming that this damage increase is the same as the soul burn, or better, maybe. He should just be getting a nice little damage increase, has some more consistency. I don't know if this is really going to make him that amazing. I think Ludwig has had a lot of trouble recently being able to wipe an entire team. He definitely needs setup. He needs attack buff most of the time as well. But when he does get set up, he definitely hits like a truck, and adding the consistency and a little bit more damage could be what he really needed in some sort of cleave type team. But it's not really anything too insane, and I think there's other characters that are kind of replaceable. Oh, hey. Oh, what are the odds? I just got a sub. Hey, look at that. Okay, then we have Destina. Okay, Destina's changes are probably, I would say, maybe the most or second most interesting changes out of everybody overall. So, first of all, her S1 now heals based on her health, not the target's health, because it's really crummy healing based off of a unit that has much less health than her's health, rather than a character with a ton of health. Obviously, she's going to heal for a lot more, so that's a good little change. Her S2, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So, keep in mind, they actually changed one of her EEs. And now the EE gives 20% extra CR push. So, her S2 will now dispel 2 debuffs, heal, and increase combat readiness by 30%. And with the exclusive equipment, it'll be 50%. Sounds kind of familiar, right? It's literally just Amelia's S2, but instead of giving the attack buff, it now heals. Because it has a 2-turn cooldown as well. They may have decreased the soul and the healing received, but having a 2-turn cooldown on this is definitely very powerful. It gives you a lot more just consistent use of abilities in a match. She's always had troubles with way too long cooldowns, just not doing enough. That's one of her biggest problems, and she has horrible base speed, so she would never really get her skills back. But I think this is really nice. I think that's a really good change, but here's where things get really crazy. Her S3. So, first of all, it revives all dead allies to 20% health. Okay, so it pulls a Maid Chloe out of nowhere, right? And then if they're not dead, it dispels all debuffs before healing, and the amount recovered proportional to the caster's max health. They decrease to healing, keep in mind. But also, at the start of the battle, she gets a buff on her for 2 turns, and the buff gives her 60% effect resistance, and it can't be dispelled. And that's actually kind of a big deal, because effect resist is naturally just worse than effectiveness, because you need 100 effect resist to counteract fully 0% effectiveness, right? So you're always at a disadvantage. But this gets rid of a lot of that disadvantage. If you use Bastion of Hope, I think it's called, the Guild War artifact, I think it gives about 70% effect resist. So if you have that and this, you just start with 130 effect resist before her base stats, before any gear, anything. So it's actually not that hard to hit a really high amount of effect resist on this character. And against a really aggressive team or cleave team, they have to kill you. If they don't kill you in time, you just revive your team. And she's really hard to debuff, and she's a naturally very tanky unit. Her one big flaw is that she's insanely slow. So you definitely would have to build up a nice amount of speed, as much tankiness as possible, and effect resist, and you have to balance all those stats. But it's kind of a big deal. So she has a lot more consistency, especially for more drawn-out long fights, and the CR push is obviously also really good. And then she's really good versus highly aggressive debuffing teams, and just aggro in general. And I think these changes, this is the type of character that really can help slow down a meta, because it becomes too risky running just full force aggressive into these kinds of units. Because, if you use everything you have, and this unit's still alive and she revives her team, and they just take the next turns, well, you're probably going to lose since you're out of steam. If you just used everything and took all your turns, like, and they take their whole roster of turns, you're probably in trouble. I think these changes are huge. I think it actually turns her into a pretty darn good character. Like, actually really, really interesting. I think people are pretty excited because she's been bad for a long time, kind of like these other characters, and this is the type of stuff that I think Smilegate needs to make more of, where it's really helping curb some of this aggressive meta. And in RTA currently, she's a Soul Weaver. She gets 15 more speed. She normally has 109 base, or no, not 109, 89 base speed, which is abysmal. It's so bad. Now she has 104 base. Is that amazing? No, but it's usable. So I think she might actually see a lot of play in RTA. And even in Guild War and Arena, she just seems like a really good character in general. I think this is a huge boost to Destina. She now seems like a very strong healer, where they combined a lot of strong abilities from different characters, such as the revive, for instance. I think this new mechanic is awesome. They took Amelia's S2. She's like a Frankenstein's monster of Soul Weavers, but then with a twist where she's actually really good at resisting debuffs. And it's more fair than something like Emilquirk, Designer Lilibet, where you debuff them and then you just can't stop them anyways. It actually requires building effect resist, which is much more fair. And there's the exclusive equipment for the extra CR push on the regen. Guider Aether. So this was a kind of weird one. I know in the balance survey, a lot of people voted him, but I think it was more as a joke than anything, let's be honest. So something interesting about Guider Aether, he actually has really high base attack, like 1200 something, and 27% base crit chance. For a 4-star, that's really impressive stats for a full damage mage. His speed is like 107, I believe. I think he has good damage multipliers as well. He's honestly not like the worst thing ever, it's just there's not really much reason to use him. So these changes, I'm not sure how much they do. So his S2 is like you do an AoE attack, or maybe it's a single attack, I actually forget. But the main thing they changed is instead of just giving a barrier for 2 turns, he now heals and gives a barrier, and the barrier strength was also increased. The one downside is that the barrier strength is proportional to the caster's max health, while it used to be attack, so that's just worse because he doesn't build any health, but he builds attack. But I think the fact that you heal and give the barrier and they increase the barrier strength, I think it's probably fine. It's definitely not a nerf. Then his S3 is dispels all buffs from the target. I believe this might be a single target ability, I believe. Dispels all buffs, increases attack of the ally with the highest attack for 2 turns, and increases their combat readiness by 50%, and they increase the damage. That's actually kind of interesting. So it feels almost like he would be used in some sort of very aggressive or cleave team, and he does his damage or whatever, and then he also buffs an ally and pushes them up. So he's actually a CR pusher while also being a damage nuke. And I think that's kind of interesting. I'm not really sure how that would play out, and I haven't really taken a full look into how his numbers are and how you could reliably build him, but that's definitely interesting. Now, is he going to really change a whole lot about the meta? Is he going to be used all the time? Probably not. These changes help him, but they're not doing a whole lot. They also made it so skill cooldown decreased by 2 turns on this ability rather than increasing the damage, but to compensate, they're just increasing the damage right here and in his molas. So it probably is about around the soul burn or so. But yeah, I don't think this is going to do a whole lot. Oh yeah, and then now increases the amount recovered when using Spirits of Protection, his S2. Kali, so this was a very interesting change. This character has been terrible, unbelievably terrible, for as long as I've actually played this entire game, really. So seeing her on here, I wasn't really expecting much, but they actually did something very interesting and I think kind of smart with her. So first of all, her S1, at first I was a little disappointed because it used to be if she was stealth, she would S1 twice, which was kind of cool. But now she steals a buff, and if you soul burn, it's a 100% chance and steals 2 buffs. And this isn't like Reamer where they copy, they steal the buffs. They strip the buffs off the opponent and you get them. That's really, really cool, actually. I like that. Then, her S2 attacks the enemy with an Unseen Blade against stealth the caster for 2 turns. At the end of the turn, detonates any bleeding effects and bombs inflicted on the target. When I saw that, I was like, Okay, I guess they're gonna make her bleed and bomb or something. That's interesting, right? And they also increase the damage, so okay, makes it better. The S3 though, this is where she's actually really interesting. I think I know why they did this specifically. So decreases buff duration by 1 turn of the target, inflicts bleeding and plants a bomb before increasing the combat readiness of the caster by 50%. So strips their immunity, puts bleed and bomb on them, and gives her a CR push. When the target is a fire elemental hero, ignores their effect resist, no 15% or anything like that can happen, and increases combat readiness of the caster by an additional 50%. That's really cool because there's this character called Hua Young that's in almost every single match of every RTA I've ever seen. I actually permanently ban her now because I'm tired of fighting her or picking her every match. And if you use this on her, Hua Young doesn't get the 30% damage reduction because this isn't a crit. And you get rid of her barrier and her immunity. So, and they increase the damage. So it might just be able to take out Hua Young straight up because you get to use this ability. You put the bomb and the bleed on them, and you do some damage. And then you immediately get another turn. You get to detonate those and stealth. That's really cool. And then after you've done that, like dealt with her Hua Young, she's still useful because she's still taking buffs from the opponent. And just stripping buffs is kind of important, I would say, overall. And the fact that she gets them, she might still be able to put a decent amount of damage and other things out. I think it's actually a really cool thing. They also change your imprint concentration from dual attack chance to percent attack. Probably good since you want as much attack as possible to scale the bomb and bleed. Overall, though, I think that's kind of cool. It's actually really interesting. She seems like a really good counter pick into Hua Young, and possibly some other characters as well, like Politis, etc. Now, a lot of Hua Young's are around 250 speed, so I guess you'd build her maybe 260 speed or something like that, and she's kind of just an assassin to deal with very specific units. I don't really like units that deal with specific elements like fire elemental, etc. But I think she's actually well done enough that it's kind of cool, and I'm actually interested in this. She seems like a very cool counter pick. And worst case scenario, I guess she makes the draft a 50-50 of whether your opponent wants to ban her or try and deal with her in the match. Armin. So this is the last buff, and I think this is a very crazy buff. So first of all, she has a flat 35% chance to stun now. It doesn't get increased by anything. But when it's not the caster's turn, she does an AoE that hits everybody. So that's kind of crazy. It immediately brings to mind, okay, you want counter set or maybe even dual attacks or something like that. That's really nice. Okay, her S2 is completely changed. Instead of being an attack use that decreases hit chance for 2 turns, which is honestly pretty crummy, now it's when she's attacked, has a, if you look at here, 20% chance to counterattack. When an ally except for the caster is attacked by a single attack, decreases damage suffered by 20%. And she's a knight as well, keep in mind. And currently single target attacks are insanely powerful. Hua Young, for instance. So reducing the damage from that by 20%, where you basically have a good adamant shield built in, and she's a knight, she could use Aureus, or you could use Elbrus, you have a counter chance, and then you also have this, so you could just constantly be AoEing and stunning their team. It makes it so she's actually bringing some nice mitigation to the team no matter what you do, and she seems like an actual threat. And then her S3, it gets a really nice change as well. So it used to do a bit of a heal and give a barrier for 3 turns, but I think these changes help it a lot. It now dispels a debuff, which I think is very important. For instance, just Emo Lilius. This just makes her good against Emo Lilius instantly. That's really nice. And gives increased defense to the caster for 2 turns, and it still gives the barrier. It also decreased the cooldown, and if you soul burn it, it lasts an extra turn, so you could actually permanently have the defense buff on her and I guess the barriers. And the barrier strength was increased. Overall, it makes it seem like whether you use Elbrus to be way more annoying, possibly versus Cleave or something like that, or if you just want to use Aureus to have her be your main tank just standing there, I think this makes her a lot stronger, a lot more viable. Actually very interested in this. She seems like an alternate to Crimson Armin. It's interesting that both Armins seem to be very good at that. I mean, Bad Cat Armin's terrible, but the other 2 Armins are both seeming kind of nice. This seems like a huge threat to really aggro teams as well. Just constantly getting stunned, you're risking a a lot every time you attack, and if you AoE, you're probably getting counterattacked. And 35% chance against a team, that's probably 1 to 2 stuns a lot of the time. That's really risky. You can't take that chance very often. She's very threatening to these teams, and both of her EEs are nice. Either increases the chance to counterattack by 5% to 25%, or cleanse another debuff. So if you cleanse 2 debuffs, like Emo Lilius did no debuffs on you, right? She can't even provoke you, and that's kind of a huge deal. Or Peyra, you just remove all of that. The counterattack chance would be more if you specifically want to use her versus like a cleave or something like that, just for that extra chance. But I think cleansing another debuff is a pretty big deal. I think Armin looks really nice. I think Armin and Destina are both very anti-aggro strong units, and I think they might see a decent amount of play, actually. I think they are the biggest winners out of all of this. And that's the end of the balance patch right there. So I guess if I were to just do a quick conclusion here, Silverblade Araminta got a nice little change. Not really anything too crazy. Dark Corvus didn't really get much, still not great. Jen gets a nice little fix, making her a little bit more consistent and usable, but might not see a ton of play unless the meta shifts more. Araminta gets a nice fun change, might see a little bit of play in some very aggressive teams, has some RNG built in, but seems like a really enjoyable character to use for people. Ludwig gets a little bit better at what he already did, a little bit more consistent, a little bit more damage, kind of nice, but nothing too crazy. Destina gets a huge change, might become one of the really strong Soul Weavers in the game. There's not many good Soul Weavers in the whole game. And so she might actually have moved up to become one of the best, I think. Amazing cleanser, really good versus aggro and cleave, very strong. Guider Aether becomes better at what he did already. He might be able to do some cool tricks now that he can actually buff an ally with attack buff and push them up at the same time while he's doing a fat nuke. Seems kind of interesting. I don't know how many people are actually going to try him out, but definitely something that I'll keep in the back of my mind, I would say. Just something that maybe you might see in a cleave team or something fun, right? Kali gets a really cool change to be able to deal with fire units. Amazing versus Hua Young. She's going to be a big counter pick to Hua Young, I would assume. And also just seems kind of like fun to use, really. Goes from complete junk to an actual fun, usable character. Armin as well, I would say. Armin, some people would use in Guild War, but let's be honest, she was not very good, very weak. I think she actually seems like one of the best knights in the game now. Overall, knights have not been that strong recently, neither have Soul Weavers, and I think that this balance patch makes a really good Soul Weaver and a really good knight, and then some other nice little changes for a few characters. I think overall this balance patch, I would consider it a success. Now, the downside is that we have to wait 2 months for the next one, and I think they're not going at the right pace. I think these are positive changes. I think that the last balance patch also had some cool changes, but when it comes down to it, we should have twice the amount of characters here changed. With how messed up the meta is, etc., it's just not happening fast enough, and I think they're actually doing a decent job with these when they put the effort in. The last one, this one, definitely seems like they actually tried to make fun, interesting changes to these characters. But I'm really hoping that they can maybe continue to do this, but at a faster pace. All in all, I think some of these characters went from trash to treasure. I think others get some nice, cool little twists and will be fun to try out. At worst, some of them are a lot better in Arena and Guild War. And at best, some of them might see a lot of play in RTA, possibly. I think that it's overall a win, but let's hope for more, right? But anyways, those are my thoughts on the entire balance patch and kind of how I would look at all these characters. And thanks a bunch for watching. I hope to see you guys next time.